It was the kind of rain that made you question whether the sky had any boundaries. Thick, unrelenting, and cold in that way that crept into your shoes and stayed there. The city lights blurred through the water-streaked windshield of the dented Toyota Corolla, its heater wheezing as it tried to keep up. Marla adjusted the crumpled pizza boxes in the passenger seat, checked the address one last time, and sighed. Her brown delivery uniform was already soaked, her curly hair clinging to her cheeks, and her fingers trembled slightly, not from a cold, but from something else entirely. A strange feeling that this delivery wasn't just another run. That tonight was different. It wasn't the address that gave her pause, it was the name on the receipt. She had laughed at it at first. Sure, she had told Jenny back at the shop, rolling her eyes. Elon Musk's ordering a pineapple and jalapeno pizza in the middle of a Thursday night in Eastwood Heights. Seems legit. But then she saw the little note at the bottom, no contact delivery, but ring once and wait for assistant. Assistant, not doorman, not housekeeper. Assistant. The GPS took her through winding streets and up a steep hill lined with old trees and iron gates. And then, as if out of nowhere, the mansion appeared. Quiet, towering, modern yet warm in a way she hadn't expected. The porch lights flickered on as she pulled up, like the place had been waiting for her. A tall man in a gray coat opened the front door before she even rang. He gave her a nod, took the boxes, and just as he turned to go inside, he stopped. "He'd like to meet you," the man said over his shoulder. "If you have a minute." Marla froze, her breath catching in her throat. The man didn't answer. He disappeared through the door, leaving it slightly ajar. She should have left. She had more deliveries. Her manager would call any minute, and she was already behind. But something tugged at her, something she couldn't name. So she followed the man through the threshold, her sneakers squishing slightly on the polished floor. The house was quiet but full of life. There were paintings of galaxies and sketches of strange machines, but also family photos and children's toys tucked under a bench near the stairs. It felt human, lived in, real. She expected cold steel and glass. What she found was warmth and books and plants in corners that no algorithm would have placed there. And then she saw him. Elon Musk stood in the living room, barefoot, in a dark sweater and jeans, holding a cup of tea, like he was just another guy winding down for the evening. He looked up from his tablet and smiled, not like someone famous or powerful, but like someone who genuinely didn't expect a pizza delivery girl to be nervous around him. "Hey," he said, "thanks for braving the weather." Marla blinked, trying to steady her voice. It's no problem. I didn't think it was really you." He chuckled and gestured toward the couch. "Well, it is. And you've made my night a little better with that absurd pizza combo." She hesitated, standing awkwardly by the entrance, until he motioned again, gently, like a friend inviting you to sit at a campfire. She finally crossed the room and sat at the edge of the cushion, still gripping her car keys in one hand. They talked. At first, it was small things. Weather, traffic, the chaos of ordering food at night. But then something shifted. "So, Marla," he said after a pause, "what do you actually want to do? Besides delivering pizza in the rain?" She blinked. Excuse me. You've got that look," he said. "Like this isn't where you're supposed to be. Like you've got 1,000 other places your mind wants to go." She laughed awkwardly. I don't know. It's complicated. Try me." And for reasons she'd never understand, she told him. Everything. That she wanted to study architecture, not to build skyscrapers or malls, but shelters, community spaces, places where people could breathe. That her mom worked 3 jobs and her little brother had asthma, and her dad hadn't called in 6 years. That she used to design houses in her sketchpad between deliveries, but now she mostly just worked and slept and woke up again. She didn't cry, but her voice cracked. Once, when she finished, there was a silence. Not the kind that made things awkward, the kind that held something sacred. Elon looked at her for a long time. Then he set down his tea and stood up, walking toward a side table where a notebook lay open. He scribbled something, tore out the page, and handed it to her. "Read this when you get home," he said, "and call the number at the bottom if you still believe in that dream by morning." Marla stared at the folded page, her heart racing. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," he said. The rain had eased by the time Marla got back to her car, but her world felt anything but calm. She sat there, engine off, fingers gripping the folded paper so tightly the corners were beginning to fray. The windshield fogged up slowly as the silence pressed in. What had just happened? 1 second she was running late on a pizza delivery, the next she was having a soul-level conversation with one of the most famous people on the planet, someone who actually listened, who asked her name like it mattered, and handed her a note that now buzzed in her pocket like it held the answers to something bigger than either of them could explain. She wanted to wait, to let the moment settle, but she couldn't. Her curiosity, like a spark in dry brush, ignited into something unstoppable. She opened the paper. In neat, all-caps handwriting was a single sentence. "You're more than the path you've been forced to walk." And below it, a phone number and the initials EM. She read it again, then again. Her chest tightened, but not in fear, in disbelief. No promises, no guarantees. Just a door, opened a crack, daring her to step through. When she got home later that night, her mother was asleep on the couch, still in her nursing scrubs, the TV playing a rerun of some cooking show they both liked. Her little brother, Matteo, had fallen asleep with his inhaler resting on his chest. Marla covered them both with blankets, then sat on the floor in the kitchen with her sketch pad. It had been months since she'd drawn anything, but now her hands moved like they remembered every line, every detail. She didn't notice how long she'd been sketching until the sun began to rise, pale gold through the thin curtains. A shelter, an open plaza, an idea, hers. She hadn't called the number yet. Something inside her needed to earn that right. The next day, Marla did 5 more deliveries. She smiled at customers, dodged potholes, argued with her manager over missing pepper flakes, but all the while, that note hummed in her pocket like a second heartbeat. By the end of her shift, she couldn't take it anymore. She dialed the number. It rang once. Then a woman's voice answered, warm, professional, and calm. "Hello, this is Charlotte. You've reached Mr. Musk's advisory office. May I ask who's calling?" Marla swallowed. Marla Reyes. I delivered a pizza last night, and he told me to call. He gave me this number." There was a pause, then the sound of a keyboard. "Yes," Charlotte said softly, "you're expected. Can you come to this address tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. sharp. Bring your sketch pad." Marla stared at the phone like it might vanish. "Wait, seriously?" "Quite seriously. We don't waste people's time. We also don't offer second chances." Then a click. Her family didn't believe her at first. Her mom thought she was being scammed. Her abuela crossed herself and said it was a sign from the Virgin Mary. Matteo just asked if Elon Musk liked video games. But Marla didn't try to convince them. She just ironed her one decent blouse, packed her drawings into a borrowed portfolio, and set 4 alarms. The next morning, she stood outside a sleek but modest building in the Arts District. Not SpaceX, not Tesla, something else. It wasn't until she was inside that she realized where she was, some kind of foundation. There were photos on the walls of community gardens, modular housing in flood zones, schools built from recycled shipping containers. Hope made physical. Charlotte greeted her with a knowing smile, offered her tea, and led her to a small conference room. "He'll be in shortly. You okay?" Marla nodded, gripping her folder like a lifeline. When Elon walked in, he didn't do a grand entrance. He just smiled, sat across from her, and said, "I liked what you said about breathing spaces. Tell me more." And she did, for an hour. She showed him her designs, buildings shaped by necessity, by emotion, not just aesthetics. Modular shelters for single parents, rooftop farms in food deserts, libraries that doubled as night shelters. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. She forgot who she was talking to. She forgot she was just a girl who delivered pizzas the day before. And when she was done, Elon leaned back and nodded slowly. "You think like a humanist," he said. "Most people think like engineers or artists. You're both. That's rare." Marla didn't know what to say. She felt dizzy. "Seen." He tapped the table. "There's a pilot project. We've been stuck on the community design. Want to join the think tank? You won't be the only non-architect, but you might be the one they remember." And just like that, her world shifted. Now, just before we continue, if you're still with us and finding yourself drawn into Marla's journey, even just a little, consider sticking around. And hey, if you want to be part of more stories that start with rain and end in revelation, tap that subscribe button. Not because everyone says to, but because maybe, just maybe, you don't want to miss what comes next. Okay, let's get back to our story. Marla walked out of the building like she was made of helium. Everything in her felt lighter, like the weight she'd been carrying for years had finally cracked and spilled out, leaving only breath and sky and possibility. The Los Angeles air didn't even feel polluted. It felt electric, alive. She held the folder to her chest, as if it might float away if she didn't anchor it with her heartbeat. The moment her feet hit the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. "Mom, are you okay? Mom, was it legit? Mom, call me." Marla smiled as she typed back, "More than okay. I'll explain everything tonight." She didn't want to tell anyone yet, not fully. Not until the invitation became something real, with handshakes and contracts, and maybe even a badge. But still, the feeling was too big to hold alone. So she called someone she hadn't spoken to in almost 3 months. "Hey, are you busy?" she asked when the line picked up. "Marla? Whoa, I didn't even know this number still worked." It was Dante, her ex, but more than that, her oldest friend. The one who used to stay up late with her on school nights drawing cities out of dreams. They had broken up for reasons neither of them could fully articulate. Timing, pressure, fear, but none of that seemed to matter now. "I think I just got a shot at something huge," she said, "and I need your honest opinion on something I drew." Dante didn't hesitate. "Come by. I'll make coffee." Later that evening, in the cramped garage that Dante had converted into a studio apartment, Marla unrolled her most ambitious sketch yet across his folding table. Dante's eyes widened as he took it in. This is yours," he asked. "Every line." He whistled low. "You leveled up, Reyes." Marla leaned against the table, trying to play it cool, but her fingers drummed with nervous energy. He said, "I think like a humanist." Whatever that means. It means you're not just designing walls. You're designing people's lives. They stayed there talking for hours, about the project, about dreams they used to have, about how strange it was that life could twist back around to offer second chances. And though nothing romantic flickered between them anymore, there was something deeply comforting in that old, unbreakable bond. The way someone who's seen your awkward teenage years can look at you like none of your scars are ugly. The next few weeks moved fast. Marla became a part of the project, officially. She wasn't just the girl who delivered a pizza. She was now part of a multidisciplinary design team focused on rethinking emergency housing infrastructure in Southern California. She was still the youngest, still the only one without a degree. But what she lacked in credentials, she made up for with grit, empathy, and ideas that made people pause mid-meeting just to say, "Wait, that might actually work." And Elon, he didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. But when he did show up at the design studio, it was always with the kind of questions that turned the room upside down in the best way. How would this shelter feel at 3 a.m. to someone who hasn't slept in days? What if the solution isn't bigger buildings but more dignity? Why do we think safety looks like concrete and fences? Marla took notes like her life depended on it. Outside of work, life was still messy. Her mom didn't always understand what she was doing. Her boss at the pizza place was annoyed she'd quit without 2 weeks' notice. The bills still came in, and Mateo still needed his medication, and sometimes it all felt like too much. But then she'd walk into the studio and see her sketches on wall, next to blueprints and 3D models and digital renders, and she'd remember, this is real. I'm not dreaming anymore. One Thursday afternoon, just as she was about to head home, Charlotte stop her near the elevator. "Elon's asking for you," she said. Marla's pulse jumped. "Now." Charlotte smiled. "He's in the atrium. Go on." She found him sitting by a shallow indoor koi pond, legs crossed, eyes closed like he was meditating. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. He opened his eyes and nodded toward the bench beside him. "You've been here long enough to answer something honestly," he said. "Do you feel like you belong?" Marla blinked. "Here." He nodded. She looked around at the soft-lit atrium, the glass ceiling spilling sunlight across the polished stone floor, and then back at him. "Most days, yeah. Some days I feel like I'm faking it." Elon leaned back. "That's how you know you're not." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Imposters don't get imposter syndrome. They just coast." Marla let that sit for a moment, then smiled. "Thanks. That actually helps." He studied her face for a beat. "I'm going to give you something else. Another envelope." She raised an eyebrow. "You and these mystery notes." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small, flat envelope. "Open it later. After dinner. You'll know what to do." She stared at it, heart racing again like it had the night she delivered that first pizza. As she walked out into the late afternoon light, the envelope tucked safely inside her coat, Marla had the strange but beautiful feeling that her life was no longer happening to her. She was building it one choice at a time. Marla waited until dinner was done, dishes were drying on the rack, and her little brother had gone to bed with his usual request, leave the door open a little, just a crack, before she sat down at the edge of her mattress, holding the envelope like it contained something radioactive. Her mother, still in her scrubs, walked by the room, gave her a tired smile, and said, "You're glowing, Mija." Marla didn't answer. She was too focused. She slid her finger under the flap and opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a plane ticket, Los Angeles to Austin, a departure date for the following week, and a small handwritten card. "Sometimes dreams grow better in new soil. Come see what we're building in Texas. EM." She stared at the card for a long time, then read the words again. Her mind immediately leaped into chaos. How would she pay for food? What about Mateo's appointments? Would her mom be okay without her help for a few days? The logistics tangled like wires in her chest. But beneath it all, something quiet and firm said, "This is a door. You've already got one foot through it." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake with her sketchpad open beside her, staring at the ceiling and imagining what it would be like to step into a whole new world again. When dawn finally slipped through the window, pale and peach-colored, she had made up her mind. She would go. A week later, Marla stood at the edge of a dusty clearing in the Texas Hill Country, shielding her eyes from the sun as a breeze swept across open land dotted with prefab structures and cranes. What she saw was not a finished community, it was a promise being built in real time. Rows of clean, minimalist housing units rose from the red soil like seeds in bloom. Children ran between shipping container classrooms painted in vibrant colors. Solar panels glinted like mirrors. There was even a communal kitchen where someone had scrawled a welcome sign in chalk. "You're not just housed here. You're home." Elon was already there talking to a group of engineers and volunteers. When he saw her, he broke away from the conversation and walked over, hands in his jacket pockets. "You came," he said simply with that half-smile. Marla looked out at the horizon. "I could not come." He gestured toward the nearest housing unit. "Come see your sketch. They built it." She didn't move at first. Her mind was trying to protect her from disappointment, convincing her it couldn't be her design. Not yet, not really. But as she walked with him, her heart thumped louder and louder. And then she saw it. One of her earliest shelter ideas, modular, circular layout, open-air center with a community fire pit, transparent roofing for natural light, had been adapted into a real, physical structure. It wasn't an exact replica. The materials were optimized, the angles refined. But the soul of it was hers. The way it felt open, safe, welcoming. The way the front porch curved, like an open arm. A young woman with a toddler stood on the steps, smiling as she watched the child chase a butterfly. Marla's throat tightened. She didn't realize she was crying until Elon handed her a cloth handkerchief. "I don't usually carry these," he said, "but something told me I might need one today." She laughed through her tears, wiping her face. "This is insane." "No, this is impact." She stood in silence, letting the enormity of it wash over her. She had lived so long in survival mode, head down, paycheck to paycheck, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to shape the world instead of reacting to it. Now here she was, 22, no degree, still unsure about half her life. But her drawing, an idea born in the back of a delivery car, was now sheltering real people, giving them safety, giving them hope. That evening, there was a small outdoor dinner hosted by the foundation. Volunteers, residents, and project members gathered under string lights. The air smelled of roasted vegetables and mesquite. Someone played soft acoustic guitar. It wasn't fancy, but it felt magical. Marla found herself sitting at a table between a civil engineer from El Salvador and a former art teacher who now coordinated community gardens. They laughed, shared stories, and passed around homemade cornbread. At one point, Elon stood up, tapped a fork gently against his glass, and raised his voice just enough to cut through the conversation. "I want to thank everyone who believes that dignity can be designed. That hope doesn't need a skyscraper, it just needs people who care." People applauded. Glasses clinked. A baby cooed somewhere in the background. Then he added, glancing toward Marla, "And I want to thank the dreamers who show up when they have every reason not to." She didn't know what to do with the attention. She ducked her head, cheeks warm, but her smile couldn't be hidden. Later that night, as the fire crackled low and people began to drift to their cabins, Marla stayed behind, staring up at the sky. The stars in Texas were different. Bigger, louder, like they had something to say. She whispered mostly to herself, "Okay, I'm ready." Because for the first time in a long time, she actually was. The next morning, as the sun rose like a golden tide over the hills of the Texas site, Marla woke in one of the pilot shelters. The walls were made from sustainable compressed wood panels, and the ceiling curved above her like the inside of a seashell. It wasn't big, just a bed, a table, a small sink, and a quiet. But it felt like a temple, a place made for dreams to breathe. She sat up slowly, still unsure if everything that had happened the day before had been real. But the plane ticket was still in her bag, the dust was still on her shoes, and the scent of mesquite smoke still lingered in her hair. And outside her window, a world she helped imagine was being built. She dressed quickly and joined the early risers. Volunteers were already moving crates of materials and setting up solar panel mounts. A few children chased each other across the red dirt. Someone had made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Marla poured herself a cup and wandered until she saw the unit again, the one modeled after her sketch. She approached it like someone visiting a grave, but what she found was life. A mother washing vegetables near the porch, the toddler stacking cups beside her. "Morning," the woman said, smiling. "You're the one who drew this place, right?" Marla nodded, almost shyly. The woman looked around, then added, "Feels like the first place that ever fit me." And that simple sentence hit harder than any applause, any email, any meeting. That afternoon, Elon invited her to walk with him through another section of the site. They followed a gravel path bordered by wildflowers and young trees just beginning to root in the Texas clay. "You have a good eye for balance," he said. "Not just between function and form, but between heart and logic. That's rare." Marla shrugged. I think people know when a place doesn't want them, and they know when it does." He glanced at her. "That's the kind of thinking we need, especially in cities." They walked in silence for a bit, passing a quiet meditation dome made of recycled plastic, a circular seating area carved from local limestone, and a tiny library with bilingual children's books. Marla could feel the scope of it now, not just as a concept, but as a movement. A blueprint for what communities could look like when people were placed at the center of the equation instead of budget lines or property values. At one point, they passed a mural in progress on the side of a storage shed, a bright image of hands holding a house made of stars. Beneath it, someone had painted in bold letters, "Dreams live here." Marla stopped and stared at it. "Did you commission that?" Elon shook his head. "Nope. One of the residents started it. Said felt more like home once they added their mark." That night, over dinner under the stars, Elon shared with Marla an idea. Something still in the early stages, something not yet spoken out loud beyond his tightest circle. "I've been thinking about cities," he said. "Not the ones we already have. The ones we could build from scratch. What if we could create a place where housing, food, education, and energy were not separate silos, but threads of the same fabric?" Marla's eyes lit up. "Like an ecosystem." "Exactly. A city where every structure has meaning, where buildings heal, where design teaches, where public space isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated." "And you want me to be part of that?" she asked, breathless. He nodded. "I want you to lead part of it." For a long moment, she just sat there, stunned. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not in school, not at work, not even in her wildest dreams. "I'm not ready," she said automatically. "No one is," he replied. "But that's what makes it worth doing." She looked at the fire, at the people around them, some laughing, some listening, some staring at the stars like they could decode the future from their alignment. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll try." Elon smiled. "That's all I ever ask." The next morning, as Marla prepared to return to LA for a brief visit home, Elon handed her one last thing, a small black box. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Open it when you get home." She didn't argue this time. She just tucked it into her bag, hugged him, awkwardly but sincerely, and promised to return. As her plane lifted off from the Texas soil, she looked down at the patchwork of homes, panels, and promise growing below, and knew that she wasn't leaving something behind. She was bringing something with her. When Marla touched down in Los Angeles again, the airport felt smaller somehow. No, not smaller, quieter. As if her senses had recalibrated. The noise that used to overwhelm her, intercom announcements, rushed footsteps, buzzing fluorescent lights, now barely reached the surface. It wasn't that the world had changed. She had. Somewhere between the red soil of Texas and the clouds above the Gulf, something inside her had finally clicked into place. She stepped outside to a cool breeze that smelled faintly of car exhaust and late afternoon coffee. Home. But different now. Her mom was waiting near the curb, leaning against their old Civic with a nervous look that cracked into 1,000 emotions when she saw Marla. "There's my Texas girl," she said, pulling her into a tight hug. Marla smiled against her mother's shoulder. "I missed you." They drove back in a comfortable silence, the kind only people who've lived through years of shared struggle can understand. When they got home, Mateo ran straight into Marla's arms, nearly knocking her over. "You smell like outside," he shouted, laughing. "Did you ride a horse?" "Not this time," she said, laughing. "But I saw real fireflies." His eyes widened. "You're lying." "I'm not. They blink like Christmas lights." That night, over arroz con pollo and pineapple slices, Marla told her family everything. The pizza, the sketch, the invitation, the shelter that had been built. Elon, the dinner under the stars. Her voice trembled a few times, but she didn't cry. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had been seen and believed in, and who now had a purpose larger than herself. Her mom listened carefully, her brow furrowed, hands clasped in her lap. "And now what?" she asked. "You go back. You leave us again." Marla met her gaze. "I don't want to leave you. I want to bring you with me. Maybe not right away, but eventually. This thing I'm part of, it's not just about buildings. It's about lives. Yours, Mateo's, ours." Her mother didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter for a long time, then reached across the table and touched her cheek. "You always were too big for this street," she said quietly. "I just didn't want the world to eat you alive." Marla covered her mother's hand with her own. "It won't, because now I know who I am." After dinner, once Mateo had fallen asleep, and her mother was on the phone with her aunt, Marla sat on the edge of her bed and remembered the black box Elon had given her. She retrieved it from her bag, still unopened. She hesitated only for a moment before lifting the lid. Inside was a sleek key card, matte black, unmarked, and underneath it a folded note. This isn't a gift, it's access. You earned it. Use it when you're ready. There was no address, no instructions, but her fingers tingled just holding it. She set the card on her nightstand, then lay down, staring at the ceiling. 1,000 questions bloomed in her mind, but somehow none of them brought fear, only wonder. The following morning, Marla visited her old pizza shop, just to say goodbye, or maybe to remind herself of how far she'd come. Jenny was there as always, leaning on the counter and pretending not to care about anything. "Well, look who's back from changing the world," she said with a smirk. Marla grinned. "Only a little. You want your job back?" "Nope." "Good," Jenny said, "because we hired a guy who drives too fast and listens to conspiracy podcasts, and honestly, it's way more entertaining now." They laughed and hugged, and for a second Marla felt the pull of the old life, the safety of routine, of knowing who you were by what uniform you wore. But it passed quickly. Like a train, she wasn't meant to board anymore. 2 days later, a package arrived at Marla's door. No sender. Inside was a set of documents, thick and neatly bound. A non-disclosure agreement, a proposal, a blueprint. The title read, Project Solace, Preliminary Concept Phase. And beneath it, in red ink, for Marla Reyes' eyes only. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. It was massive. Not just a community, an entire city block concept. Sustainability, circular economy, zero waste systems, schools built into gardens, hospitals connected to art spaces, everything designed to foster belonging. And on page 3, in the margin, written in the same unmistakable all-caps handwriting, "Where do you see joy fitting into this?" She closed the folder slowly, placed her palms on the cover, and exhaled. She didn't have the answers. Not yet. But she was ready to start asking the right questions. The morning air in Los Angeles held a kind of brittle clarity, the kind that makes you feel like anything is possible, and also like you might shatter if you breathe too hard. Marla stepped out onto the front porch with a travel mug in hand, the black card tucked safely in her back pocket like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Her mom was at work already, Mateo at school, and for the first time in what felt like years, she had an entire day with nothing to do but choose. The proposal for Project Solace was still spread out across her bed like a sacred map. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Dante. Some dreams, she'd learned, needed a little silence before they could grow roots. By mid-morning, she found herself back in the community library she used to visit as a kid. Not for the books, though she still loved them, but for the quiet. The kind of quiet that held space, not pressure. She spread the documents out across one of the long wooden tables, tracing the proposed street layout with her finger. The design was revolutionary, yes, but sterile. Beautiful in form, but emotionally flat. That's where she came in. She opened her sketchpad and started doodling over the blueprints. She curved the plazas into spirals instead of squares. Added elevated walkways with translucent flooring. Designed community fountains not with statues, but with mirrors and mosaics made from recycled bottles, things people could see themselves in. She added plant walls, sound gardens, hidden reading nooks, murals that changed with the seasons. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory surfaced, Elon's words on their walk. "Where do you see joy fitting into this?" She smiled, and the pencil in her hand moved like it was dancing. She didn't realize hours had passed until a librarian gently tapped her shoulder and said the building was closing soon. She looked at the sketchpad, then at the black card. The weight of it was no longer intimidating. It felt like permission. The next morning, she took the metro downtown, the black card nestled in her wallet. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but something inside her knew it was time. She followed the address from the package to a glass building that looked completely unremarkable until she stepped inside. The lobby was quiet clean, with no receptionist in sight. Just a sleek black pedestal with a card reader. She hesitated for a breath, then placed the card on the scanner. A soft chime. A panel slid open in the wall with a gentle click, revealing an elevator with no buttons, just a single glowing symbol on the floor: infinity. She stepped in. The elevator moved without movement, no vibration, no hum. It was like stepping through space itself. When the doors opened, she expected high-tech chaos. But what she found was a large, sunlit room filled with natural wood, live plants, paper blueprints, and real people. Architects, environmentalists, engineers, artists. Some looked up and nodded. Others were deep in discussion. On the far wall, a quote painted in gold script read, "The future belongs to those brave enough to imagine it." A woman approached her mid-40s with short silver hair and the kind of calm presence you don't learn in school. "You're Marla," the woman said, more as a statement than a question. "I am. I'm Callie. Elon told us about you. Golme, there's someone I want you to meet." She led Marla through the space to a section that looked less like an office and more like a creative studio. Sketches everywhere, notes pinned with magnets, coffee mugs scattered like wildflowers. At a drafting table stood a man in a rumpled shirt and suspenders, humming to himself. "Dean," Callie said, "this is Marla." The man turned, eyes bright behind round glasses. "Ah, the architect of joy." Marla laughed awkwardly. "I wouldn't go that far." "You should," he replied. "Come look." He gestured to the screen where a 3D model rotated slowly. It was the proposed community block, but it had been updated. Her spirals, her gardens, her mirrored mosaics. Someone had taken her sketches from the library and translated them into digital form. How did you?" she stammered. "Elon sent them last night," Callie said. "He said, these lines feel like hope. Let's make them real." For the first time in her life, Marla felt what it was like to be not just included, but integrated. Not just heard, but implemented. Callie leaned in and handed her a badge. It wasn't flashy, just a small rectangle with her name and a single word beneath it: visionary. "You're not here to assist," she said. "You're here to shape." And just like that, Marla Reyes officially joined the future. By her third day inside the Vision Lab, Marla had lost all sense of what a traditional office should look like. This place didn't smell like ink and paper. It smelled like ideas, like fresh-cut wood, like possibility. One wall was a living vertical garden. Another held chalkboards filled with equations and messy, poetic scrawls that read more like journal entries than project notes. And tucked between those spaces were people, so many people, working on things that sounded more like dreams than jobs. One woman was prototyping modular schools that could be folded and unfolded like origami. A man across the room was sketching parks that could purify air as naturally as a forest. And in the corner, a group of kids, not interns, actual kids, had been invited to brainstorm what their ideal neighborhood playground would look like. Marla watched wide-eyed, then turned back to her workstation. Her task for the week was deceptively simple. Take the current design of the community plaza and make it feel less like a corridor, more like a heartbeat. It was the kind of prompt that would have intimidated her months ago. But now, she approached it like a language she was finally fluent in. She began mapping movement, how feet might wander when the mind was relaxed, how a grieving parent might walk slower than a child bursting with excitement. She built sensory zones, places to sit in shade and silence, others to play music or watch rainwater trickle through an artistic channel carved into the concrete. She replaced benches with curved seating that faced each other. She added platforms at different heights so conversations could happen with movement, not just words. By the end of the day, she had created not a plaza, but a pulse. Dean walked by her desk, coffee mug in hand, and paused mid-sip. "That is beautiful," he said. She smiled. "It's a start." He lowered the mug. "I hope you know that most people in this field spend decades trying to unlearn what you already instinctively understand." Marla looked at her screen. "You mean how to make a place feel like home?" Dean nodded. Exactly that. Later that evening, the team held a small gathering on the rooftop. Not a party, exactly, just a ritual they called above the grid. Once a week, they left the sketches, computers, and scale models below to look at the city from above and ask themselves, are we making it better? The skyline shimmered in the distance, windows glowing like small fires. Marla stood at the edge with Callie beside her, both holding steaming mugs of herbal tea. Callie sipped, then asked, how are you doing, really? Marla paused. Honestly, I keep waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, sorry, we made a mistake. You're not supposed to be here. Callie chuckled softly. We all do at some point. But I'm not a licensed architect. I didn't go to MIT or Yale. I used to deliver pizzas. Callie turned to her, expression calm and clear. And you still delivered meaning. That's more than some people do with degrees. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind lifting strands of Marla's hair. Callie added gently, do you want to stay? Marla looked out at the city, the lights, the noise, the lives being lived below. Then she looked inward, to the quiet certainty she'd carried ever since Texas. I do, she said. Callie nodded. Good, because we're just getting started. The next morning, Marla was surprised to find an envelope waiting at her desk. Her name, handwritten in black ink. Inside a simple message. Pack a bag. You're going to Detroit. No signature, no details, just coordinates and a time. She showed it to Dean, who grinned. You've been invited to the next layer. The next layer. He winked. You'll see. She left that evening with only a backpack, her sketch pad, and a fast-beating heart. The flight was quiet. The car that picked her up from the Detroit airport was silent except for soft instrumental jazz. And when they pulled up to a gated facility near an old repurposed factory, her jaw dropped. The gate opened to reveal what looked like an entire neighborhood under construction, but with no heavy machinery, no cranes, no noise. Just people, hundreds of them, working with tools, talking, planting, building with their hands. A man approached her car as it parked. He looked about 60, with weathered skin, bright eyes, and a clipboard. You Marla? I am. He extended a hand. Welcome to Haven. Haven. Experimental neighborhood model. Population, 142 and growing. We don't just design things here, we live in them. She followed him inside, eyes wide, taking in the modular homes with rooftop gardens, solar charging stations, playgrounds with sculptural elements, and open kitchens where people shared food as easily as conversation. As the sun began to set over the rows of eco-homes, casting long shadows that danced between light and future, Marla realized this was more than architecture. This was life design. And she had just stepped into its living, breathing heart. The morning in Detroit was unlike anything Marla had ever felt. It wasn't just the crispness in the air or the golden streaks of sun cutting through the remnants of old industry. It was the pulse. The way this neighborhood, named Haven, breathed like something alive. Not perfect, not polished, but true. Real. The man who greeted her, Daryl, she learned, walked her through the community like a proud father showing off a child's science project. Except instead of equations on cardboard, there were homes made from shipping containers reimagined with elegance, communal gardens fed by gray water systems, and cobblestone pathways reclaimed from demolished buildings around the city. Everything here has a story, Daryl said as they passed a large circular courtyard filled with wind chimes and climbing ivy. Every brick, every window pane. Nothing was wasted, not even the people. Marla stopped in front of a mural stretched across a wall, a series of hands passing tools to one another, an older man to a teenager, a woman to a child to a stranger. At the bottom, someone had painted in deep, vibrant letters, "We build together because we are together." It was all too much in the best way, the kind of beauty that didn't scream for attention, it whispered for understanding. She spent the next 3 days at Haven with no defined schedule. She was invited into meetings, yes, but more often into meals, casual conversations, and shared tasks. One morning, she helped a group of local teens paint a multipurpose room. Another, she found herself in the kitchen helping an older woman named June prepare lentil stew for the entire block. June wore bangles that jingled with every move and had a laugh that could melt steel. "You don't build a community with concrete," she said, passing Marla a bowl of chopped carrots. "You build it with connection. Everything else is just weatherproofing." By the fourth day, Marla was already sketching in the corners of her notebook new ideas for how to better integrate micro-libraries into garden zones, designs for outdoor classrooms under solar panel awnings, spaces designed for conflict resolution through shared creation, not confrontation. She sat on the steps of one of the homes that evening, watching two kids race through a chalk-drawn maze on the pavement. The younger one stopped breathless and asked her, "Are you the one that's going to make more houses like this?" Marla blinked. "Maybe." The child grinned. "You should. This one feels like a treehouse, but like for the soul." She laughed. "That's a pretty good design brief." Later that night, as the community gathered for A Circle, a weekly event where residents sat in a giant ring to discuss anything on their hearts, Marla was invited to speak. She hesitated at first, but then she stood, hands slightly trembling, and said, "I used to think I had to earn my place in spaces like this. That if I didn't come from a certain school or neighborhood or background, I wasn't allowed to help build anything meaningful. But I'm learning that it's not about being allowed. It's about showing up, again and again, with your whole heart." Someone clapped, then someone else. And soon the whole circle was applauding, not politely, but with the kind of energy that told her, "We see you. We believe in you." After the circle, as the sky turned dark and the moon rose over Haven, Marla received a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Meet me at the greenhouse, 10 p.m. Come alone, E." Her heart jumped. She arrived a few minutes early. The greenhouse was quiet, lit only by soft, ambient lights and the shimmer of moonlight reflecting off glass panels. Inside, plants of all shapes and sizes filled the space. Vertical herb gardens, bioluminescent ferns, even a banana tree that seemed completely out of place but oddly at home. Elon was already there, kneeling beside a small cactus in a clay pot. "Succulents," he said, not looking up. "Misunderstood. People think they're just hard and dry. But really they're protectors. They store everything they need to survive." Marla stepped forward. "You asked to see me." He stood, brushing soil from his palms. "I did. I wanted to talk. Not as an investor. Not as your mentor. Just person to person." She nodded, curious. "I see the way you interact with this place," he said. "Not like an outsider trying to improve it. Like someone remembering something ancient. Like you've already lived in 100 neighborhoods like this in 100 past lives." Marla smiled softly. "Maybe I have." He walked over to a long wooden bench beneath a hanging vine. "Sit with me." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels earned, comfortable. Then Elon said, "I'm not always sure what I'm doing anymore." That surprised her. "I used to believe innovation was everything. That if we built fast enough, we could fix the world. But now," he looked around, "now I wonder if what we really need is to slow down, to listen more, to feel more." Marla didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply placed her hand flat on the table and said, "Then maybe that's the new frontier. Not Mars, not AI, but presence." He turned to her, eyes searching. "And maybe," she added, "what we design next shouldn't just be efficient. It should be kind." Elon nodded slowly, almost reverently. "You're ready for your own build." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He handed her another envelope. This time it was red. Marla held the red envelope in her lap, like it might burst into flame. She was back in her room at Haven, the gentle hum of Detroit's early night filtering through the open window. The distant sound of a neighbor laughing, a pot clinking in a shared kitchen, the low roll of tires on pavement. It all felt strangely intimate, like the world was holding its breath for her to open it. She did, slowly, letting the red paper peel back with a whisper. Inside, a plane ticket to Mexico City, a handwritten note, Your build, your voice, your story. Let it rise. E. No blueprints, no instructions, no title, only coordinates and a date 3 days from now. Marla's breath caught. A part of her had been waiting, maybe hoping, that this next step wouldn't come so quickly. But now that it had, a deep calm took root in her belly. Fear tried to climb up her spine, but it had nowhere to land. She wasn't who she used to be. She was ready. She arrived in Mexico City to a flurry of color, sound, and vibration. The city breathed loud, lived wide. Music spilled out of cafes. Children darted between sidewalk vendors selling mango with chili. Murals exploded across entire buildings, stories painted in every hue imaginable. But beneath the rhythm was something else. A tension, a gap. The neighborhood she was taken to, Colonia Dolores, was not yet part of the city's growing skyline. It was still made of rusted metal siding, patched roofs, and sidewalks cracked like dry earth. But the people, they were luminous. Her guide was a young architect named Emiliano, whose eyes lit up when he spoke about urban transformation. "We don't want charity," he told her as they navigated the winding streets. "We want collaboration. We don't want outside ideas forced on us. We want to build with our hands, with our memories." She nodded, taking mental notes of every gesture, every shadow. "And you've been waiting for a space to do that." For years, the city approves plans, then shelves them. We get consultants who don't know our names. You're different. You listen. Marla had never felt the weight of responsibility like this. In Texas, in LA, even in Detroit, she was part of something greater. But this was hers. Her call, her imprint. She spent the next week living among the community. She was offered coffee from chipped mugs, grilled a lote wrapped in newspaper, a place to sleep in the corner of a school turn shelter. And every night she listened, not just with her ears, but with her skin, her senses, her intuition. A grandmother told her, "What we need isn't just a place to stay, it's a place to return to." A boy said, "I want a wall I can paint without someone yelling." A woman whispered, "Somewhere I can dance and not feel like I'm in someone else's city." Marla stayed up each night sketching by candlelight, the air thick with incense and the distant echo of guitar strings. She didn't draw buildings at first, she drew stories. The way laughter curved in a plaza, the shape of music under an awning, the rhythm of conversation passing between windows. And slowly, the structure emerged, not as a shelter, not even as a traditional home, but as a hybrid space, a place of becoming. Part amphitheater, part co-op kitchen, part community hub with rooms that shifted based on the need. A heart house, as she called it. Open air, alive with movement, built of stone, reclaimed wood, ceramic tile, and hand-painted mosaics from the children. When she showed the initial sketch to Emiliano and the local council, the room went silent. One man wept. A woman clasped Marla's hands and said in Spanish, "You drew our soul." Emiliano nodded. "We build it, together." And they did. Over the next 2 weeks, teams gathered not just from a community, but from nearby neighborhoods. Word spread. Volunteers came with paint, cement, poetry, and song. Local artists carved their myths into columns. Children embedded glass marbles into the walkways. A retired dancer led evening warm-ups for those lifting bricks. Marla didn't lead with orders. She led by presence. She lifted beams, stirred plaster, brought water, laughed, learned the jokes, got blisters, cried when the first roof tile was placed. On the final day, as the sun set behind the freshly built archway entrance, the entire community gathered in front of the structure. A mural, one that wasn't in her plan, had been painted above the door. It showed a phoenix, rising not from fire, but from hands. Dozens of hands, all different shades, shapes, and sizes, lifting it into the sky. And below it, in painted script, "Aquí comienza algo eterno." Here begins something eternal. Marla stood beside Emiliano, dirt under her fingernails, heart full to the brim. "This is yours," he said. She shook her head. "No, this is ours." And as candles were lit, Music began to swell, and the first dance was shared on the newly born floor of a dream. Marla realized something profound. She hadn't just built a structure. She had become one. The red envelope never left Marla's side during her final night in Mexico City. After the dance, after the music faded into soft street sounds and quiet conversation, she sat alone inside the Heart House. Candles flickered in niches carved into the walls. The scent of lime and clay and fresh flowers lingered in the air. The envelope rested on the community table in front of her, daring her to open it. This time, she didn't hesitate. Inside, another card. No plane ticket, no schedule, just a sentence written in neat, deliberate pen strokes. The world is listening. What will you say next? Below it, a set of GPS coordinates. Somewhere in the United States. She looked it up on her phone. Pine Grove, Tennessee. Pine Grove wasn't a place that showed up in brochures. It wasn't known for startups, skylines, or solar arrays. It was a stretch of back road framed by trees, fading paint on clapboard porches, and more silence than signal. But it was a place people called home. People who didn't want to leave, but who also didn't know how to stay. She arrived on a rainy afternoon. A man named Curtis met her at a small diner with a half-drunk cup of coffee and tired eyes that still held a glint of defiance. "You're the girl from the Elon project," he said, sliding a napkin across the table. "You look younger than I expected." "I get that a lot," Marla replied, trying to sound confident despite being soaked and exhausted. Curtis nodded. "You know anything about towns like this?" She looked out the window. A woman walked past in boots held together with tape, shielding her child from the rain with a grocery bag. "I know what it feels like when you're invisible," Marla said. He leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Then maybe you'll listen better than the last 4 architects they sent." Pine Grove had been left behind, not just by industries, but by ideas. The town once thrived on coal and manufacturing, but now its schools were crumbling, its hospitals understaffed, and its community split between nostalgia and numbness. What made it different from Mexico City or Detroit wasn't the poverty, it was the invisibility. No one was documenting Pine Grove's pain. It wasn't dramatic enough. It just faded. Marla didn't come in with sketches this time. She came with questions. "What would it take for you to feel proud of this place again?" she asked a retired mechanic named Earl. "A porch that didn't leak," he said. "What do you miss the most?" she asked a former music teacher. "Children's voices in the school," she answered. "If something new was built here, what should it feel like?" she asked a teenage girl behind the counter at the hardware store. "Safe," the girl whispered. "Like my grandma's house." Each answer became a thread, and Marla started weaving. She found an abandoned church with strong bones and a leaky roof. It was centrally located, visible from the main road, with a bell tower that hadn't rung in decades. She called Curtis. "I want to turn that church into a civic center," she said. "But not just for city council meetings. For potlucks, for music, for laughter, for healing." Curtis raised an eyebrow. "You sure the people around here are ready for all that?" "I'm not waiting for them to be ready," she said. "I'm inviting them to help build it." And again, something magical began to unfold. But this time it moved slower, more cautiously. Marla learned to pace herself with the rhythm of the town. Progress came through conversation on porches, shared meals in backyards, hands brushing paint onto wood with care. Children peeked in through broken windows, then later helped sweep the dust. Elders began gathering in lawn chairs just to watch the work evolve. Marla slept in a guest room above a closed bookstore where she journaled every night beside a stack of forgotten novels. She wrote down the names of everyone she met. She drew the town not how it was, but how it felt when people began to believe in it again. When the community space was finally unveiled, there was no ribbon cutting. Just a slow gathering of folding chairs, crockpots, and laughter that hadn't echoed off those walls in years. Curtis stood at the front of the room and tapped a spoon against a mason jar. "This is our place now," he said, "but let's never forget who helped us see it first." He looked at Marla. "I've lived here 67 years, and I've never seen anything bloom like this." She blinked back tears. That night, as she stood under the bell tower, now adorned with soft lights and blooming vines, she heard a familiar chime from her phone. A message. Unknown number. Are you ready to lead others the way you've been led? E. She didn't respond right away. She just looked up at the bell, at the quiet stars above a place no map would highlight, and let her answer form in the stillness. Pine Grove faded into the rearview mirror, but it didn't leave her heart. Marla carried the weight of the place with her, not as a burden, but as a blueprint. The sound of hammers and conversation, the smell of wood and chili cooking in a shared kitchen, the way a town no one believed in had quietly, stubbornly bloomed. She had left behind a structure, yes, but more than that, a signal to anyone still waiting to be seen. Now she was on the move again. She wasn't sure what she expected when she landed in San Francisco, but wasn't what greeted her. No red envelope, no Elon, no instructions, just a text message from an unknown number that read, Mission Street, look for the bookstore. The door will be open. And it was. The bookstore was narrow, the air thick with old pages and dust motes floating in shafts of sun. There was no one behind the register, only a note taped to the desk. Downstairs. She followed the creaky wooden steps into a basement that opened into something completely unexpected. It wasn't a bunker. It was a classroom. A long room filled with easels, folding tables, whiteboards scribbled with phrases like design as dignity and what if empathy was policy. And at the far end of the room, a circle of chairs, not arranged for formality, but for honesty. Seated in them were about a dozen people, young, old, some confident, others clearly hesitant, all of them holding sketch pads or notebooks or nothing at all, but every one of them was watching her as she stepped in. A woman in a wheelchair rolled forward with a kind smile. You must be Marla. Yeah, I guess I am. We've been waiting for you. It was called the studio, not a school, not a think tank, a place where lived experience was worth more than any diploma, where stories were treated like source code, where those who had once been ignored were now invited to reimagine the world from the ground up. The woman in the wheelchair was named Noor. She had once worked as a city planner until she left the profession after watching one too many communities be bulldozed for luxury condos. I don't want to build what's profitable anymore, she said to Marla. I want to build what's possible. Over the next few days, Marla listened to stories that rewired how she saw the world. A former inmate named Marco who now designed prison alternatives rooted in art and re-entry. A teenage girl named Zion who was mapping neighborhoods by sound instead of streets. An immigrant mother named Farida who dreamed of a city where the markets were also museums and every grocery aisle had poetry. Each evening, Marla returned to her temporary loft and stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed in the best way. Here were people who had suffered, who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. And yet, here they were sketching liberation into every sidewalk and windowsill. On the third day, Elon finally appeared. Not with fanfare, not with speeches. He sat beside her in the circle, jeans dusty, hair windblown, sipping a thermos of green tea. This, he said quietly, gesturing around the room, is where the future is being shaped now. Marla looked at him sideways. Not at Tesla, not in the satellites. He smiled. The satellites will get us places, but these people will remind us why we're going. She looked at Noor, at Zion, at Marco, and felt it. Yes, she was no longer just building. She was helping others learn how to build, why to build, and most importantly, who to build for. Elon passed her a folder, not unlike the one she had received in LA months before. But this time, it wasn't a sketch. It was a challenge. Inside, she found a list of 10 names, places, young dreamers from different corners of the world, from rural India to the streets of Atlanta, from Nairobi to the outskirts of Montreal. Each had been identified as someone who saw differently. At the bottom of the list, your next mission isn't to build alone, it's to light the torches. She closed the folder slowly. It wasn't just about designing a city anymore. It was about planting the seeds of design in hearts across the globe. Marla sat on the rooftop of the converted bookstore that housed the studio, watching the morning fog lift over San Francisco. The city stretched before her like a web of possibility. Buildings buzzed with energy below, but up here in the quiet, she was focused on 10 names written in clean black ink inside the folder Elon had given her. Each name was like spark, a starting point, a question. How do you light someone else's fire without extinguishing your own? She knew this was different now. Not a project, not a design, not a one-time build. This was mentorship, legacy, teaching others how to see what she had learned to see, that every cracked sidewalk and boarded window still had a heartbeat beneath it. She stared at the first name on the list. Leena Chowdhury, Jodhpur, India. A week later, she found herself thousands of miles away in the desert city of Jodhpur, its blue walls shimmering under the heavy sun. Marla met Leena outside a weather-worn school built into the side of a hill. The teenager was quiet at first, brilliant eyes, curious posture, a sketchbook clutched to her chest like it was armor. Marla smiled gently. You ready to build something? Leena tilted her head. I don't think they'll let me. Marla crouched beside her. Who? Everyone. Then let's start with something they can't stop you from building, an idea. In a shaded corner of the city, they worked side by side for days. Leena had dreams of turning a former textile warehouse into a community learning hub for girls. But she didn't know how to begin. Marla didn't draw for her. She asked questions. She listened. She held the mirror. And Leena answered not with words, but with a flurry of sketches that grew bolder by the hour. By the end of the week, Leena stood before a group of elders and presented her vision. Marla didn't speak once. She didn't need to. When the elders agreed to grant the space and help with materials, Leena cried. Not out of shock, but because something that had always felt locked inside her had finally been named and believed. Before Marla left, Leena gave her a hand-bound book of her drawings. You open the door, she whispered. No, Marla said. You walk through it. Next was Rahim in Nairobi, then Alina in Montreal, then Terrence in Atlanta. Each one of them came from a different struggle, a different scar, but they all had the same flicker in their eyes, the thing Marla had once held onto in the back seat of her beat-up delivery car. That maybe, despite everything, their ideas mattered. In Kenya, she helped Rahim design a space that used music to teach coding. In Canada, Alina reclaimed a train station for food justice. In Atlanta, Terrence transformed a park into a performance lab for kids who didn't fit the mold. With every stop, Marla grew quieter. She stopped offering suggestions and started offering presence. She realized that leadership wasn't about speaking louder. It was about listening better. And still, each time she boarded another plane, another train, another borrowed motorbike across dusty roads, a piece of her longed for the familiar, for home. But what was home now? Was it LA? Was it that first shelter in Texas? Was it Haven, the bookstore, the Heart House in Mexico City? Or was it something else entirely? One night, alone in a tiny apartment in Montreal, she opened her sketchpad and tried to draw a place that could hold all those answers. Her pencil moved slowly at first, but then the lines began to layer and swirl. She didn't draw walls. She drew connections, paths leading into courtyards, thresholds where people met before stepping inside, open kitchens, rooftop gardens, modular spaces that expanded and contracted like lungs. And at the center, not a tower, not a monument, but a table. Round, inviting, endless. It was a vision not for a building, but for a movement. The next day, she scanned the sketch and sent it to Elon with a single sentence. It's time we built this together. His reply came just 2 minutes later. Come home. When Marla returned to California, it felt less like landing and more like arriving. There was no press waiting, no reporters, just Charlotte standing at the curb in a soft gray coat, waving with a warmth that made Marla smile before she even got her bag. You've been busy, Charlotte said as they hugged. So have you, Marla replied. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the city sliding by in muted tones as fog hugged the hills. Marla noticed small changes, murals where there hadn't been murals before, community gardens in unlikely corners. It was as if the city itself was beginning to breathe differently. When they reached their destination, Marla's breath caught. It wasn't a tower. It wasn't even a building, not yet. It was a foundation, an outline, a vast cleared space near the edge of the bay, where the skyline still shimmered in the distance, but the land itself was quiet, like a blank page waiting for ink. In the center, a single wooden sign read, Sora. Charlotte caught her expression. It means sky in Japanese, she said. Elon wanted something that sounded light, open, but the name was your choice. Marla blinked. Mine. Charlotte nodded. You already chose it. When you sent that sketch with the table at the center, you called it a sky place. Suddenly, she remembered. Not the word, but the feeling. The one she had chased since the beginning. The kind of place where possibility and humanity met. Elon appeared from a nearby trailer, dressed in a navy hoodie and jeans, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You made it, he said, handing one to her. She smiled. I told you I would. He pointed to the open space. This is yours now. Her heart pounded. You're serious. As a blank page. He turned to face the bay, steam rising from his cup. This won't just be a community. It'll be a prototype. The kind of place that proves cities don't have to fail people. They can amplify them. Marla looked at the field, imagining rooftops woven with green, classrooms without walls, communal kitchens pulsing with conversation, and yes, a table. Always a table. But I can't do it alone, she said. You won't, Elon said, then turned and pointed to a small crowd approaching the site. Marla's breath caught again. There they were: Noor, Marco, Zion, Lena, Emiliano, Curtis, Rahim, Alina, Terrence, and others she hadn't met yet. Each of them holding their own blueprints, notebooks, sketches. Each of them carrying stories, futures, questions. Zion reached her first and threw her arms around Marla. I told you I'd find you again, she said, grinning. I'm glad you did. They all gathered near the wooden sign. No ceremony, no press, just the soft hum of hope being spoken into the air by those who had once been unheard. Marla stepped up onto a small platform, just a slab of stone, really, and looked at them all. This place is not mine, she began. It's not Elon's. It's not for one person or one story. She paused. It's for anyone who's ever felt like their dream didn't fit inside the walls that already exist. She turned and looked at Elon. Thank you for seeing me. He gave a small nod. You made it easy. She laughed. You made it real. That afternoon, the group gathered for their first design session. No one sat at the head of the circle. The blueprints were spread out across picnic blankets. They used colored pencils and markers. Someone brewed tea. Someone else played soft guitar. Kids sketched beside adults. Elders whispered memories into new possibilities. And in the center of it all, Marla sat with her sleeves rolled up, barefoot in the grass, surrounded by friends, peers, dreamers, her tribe. Later, as the sun began to dip into the bay and the golden hour lit their makeshift design camp like a cathedral, Elon knelt beside her, holding out a small item wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. It was a compass. Old, brass, weathered. He said simply, you won't need directions anymore. Just choose the next right place to stand. Construction began within weeks. Not with bulldozers, but with intention. The land called Sora wasn't approached like a blank space waiting to be filled. It was treated like a living thing, something to be in conversation with. They walked it first, for hours, for days, mapping sun patterns, wind direction, listening to the land's rhythm before leaving any mark upon it. Marla stood at the center every morning barefoot, sketchpad in hand, coffee in the other, the breeze brushing her curls across her cheeks. She drew lines in the dirt with a stick before ever committing them to paper. She was different now, less rushed, more grounded. less driven by fear of being replaced, more pulled by the vision of what could belong. The team that formed around her was as unconventional as the place itself. Zion was building a sound map of the terrain, integrating natural acoustics into the gathering spaces. Noor worked with accessibility first, designing paths not as alternatives but as the default. Curtis brought in a local crew from Pine Grove who knew how to make things last through storms. Lena coordinated a digital archive so the community could track every phase of creation, visually, emotionally, democratically. And Elon, he showed up unannounced, often barefoot, often with questions that turned into days of rethinking. Why are we still designing roofs that assume the rain is a problem? What does safety sound like? What if homes could invite instead of protect? He didn't lead the way people thought he would. He unlocked, challenged, and then stepped back. Marla once found him sitting cross-legged in the middle of a half-built courtyard, staring at the sky. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He pointed upward. "That we've spent centuries building walls to keep things out. Maybe the next era is about building frames to let things in." She scribbled that down immediately. When the first unit of Sora was completed, a circular space designed to host everything from community meals to music rehearsals, it wasn't celebrated with a ribbon cutting. Instead, the team held a listening session. Not to speak, but to sit, together, to let the building breathe with them. Children traced their fingers across the mosaic tiles. Elders leaned against the smooth earthen walls. Musicians strummed low chords and let the sound echo back without amplification. The space responded. It embraced. That evening, after everyone had left, Marla stayed behind. She lit one candle in the center of the room and sat cross-legged, exactly where Elon had once pointed. She closed her eyes. In the silence, she heard everything. Mexico City's laughter, Detroit's resistance, Pine Grove's resilience, Jodhpur's spark, the whispers of all the hands that had shaped her hands. And then something new, her own heartbeat, steady and sure, like the rhythm of a home she had built from herself outward. The next morning, something unexpected arrived. A letter, hand-delivered. No return address, just her name, written in silver ink. Inside a photograph. It was her, at the original pizza shop, before it all, holding a stack of boxes, rain-soaked, hair plastered to her cheek. She didn't remember anyone taking the photo, but there it was, undeniably her. And taped to the back of it, a note. Even then, you were building something. No signature, no clue, just truth. Marla held the photo in her lap, staring at the younger version of herself. Not embarrassed, not sad, grateful. She stood and placed the photo gently on the central table inside the first pavilion. She pressed it flat against the smooth wood with both palms, anchoring it in this new foundation, not as a beginning, not as an end, but as a witness. Weeks turned into months, and Sora began to take form, not just as a place, but as a rhythm. Not as a city, but as a practice. Every stone laid carried the weight of intention. Every window was placed not only for light, but for story, whose view would it hold, whose morning would it brighten. Marla was no longer just a designer, a dreamer, or even a mentor. She had become a weaver, someone who connected lives into landscapes, emotions into structures. Her days were filled with design sessions and laughter, quiet contemplation, and hands in the earth. And people came, from everywhere. One crisp morning, as fog still lingered over the bay, she found herself walking the main path when she spotted her mother, standing at the edge of the plaza, holding a small suitcase. Marla froze. "Mama," she whispered, unsure if she was dreaming. Her mother turned, the wind tugging gently at her cardigan. "You said one day we'd come too." Marla ran to her, tears slipping silently as they hugged, long and hard. "I wanted you to see it," she said. "Everything I told you, it's real." Her mother looked around at the curved walls, the colorful mosaic trails, the open gardens where children painted beside elders, and she simply said, "I know. I can feel it." That afternoon, Marla gave her a tour, not the polished kind, but the slow one, the real one. They walked barefoot along the soft clay paths. Her mother asked questions, not about the architecture, but about the people. Who lived here? What were their names? What were their dreams? And later, sitting under a shade tree near a hand-carved bench, her mother held Marla's hands and said, "You didn't just build a place, did ya? You built a way." The next day, Elon brought something unexpected. It was a canvas, blank, large, placed in the central courtyard with no explanation. People gathered, curious. Marla looked at him, puzzled. "We've built with plans," he said. "Now let's build with memory. No sketches, no blueprints. Just paint what this place has become." For the first time, the space transformed into a living gallery. Zion painted the sounds, the hum of conversations, birdsong, laughter echoing off domes. Noor painted the sensation of movement, wheels on smooth stone, children's feet across warm tile. Curtis painted the sky, how it felt different now, less heavy, more forgiving. Lena painted the threads, people's hands touching, weaving through time. Marla stood in front of the canvas for a long time before adding her mark. She didn't draw buildings. She didn't draw faces. She drew a spiral, soft, continuous. The same spiral she had once imagined in a plaza sketch long ago. A spiral because there was no center, only movement, only return. That evening, with the mural drying in the golden light, Elon sat beside her on the wide bench near the bay. "You know," he said, "the first time I saw you, you were soaking wet, holding a pizza box, and I thought, here's someone who has no idea how brilliant she is." Marla laughed. "I didn't. Not then. And now?" She tilted her head. "Now I think. I'm not trying to be brilliant. I'm trying to be useful." He nodded. "That's more rare." They sat for a while in comfortable silence, watching the water shimmer as the sun lowered itself gently into the sea. "Elon," she said softly, "what happens when this is done?" He looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. This isn't the end. This is just the prototype." She turned to him. "Of what?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood, brushing dust from his jeans, and said, "Tomorrow, we announce it to the world." Marla's stomach tightened. "Announce what?" He paused. "Not what we built, but how. We're going to show people that this way isn't a miracle. It's a method, scalable, adaptable, shareable." She stood slowly, heart thumping. "Are you ready?" he asked. She looked around at the children dancing near the mosaic wall, at her mother laughing with Lena in the garden, at Zion helping a visitor navigate the new terrain like it was a language she spoke fluently. And she answered with no doubt in her voice, "Yes, let's show them." The announcement came not with a bang, but with a heartbeat. There was no stage, no corporate logo, no suits, just a live stream set up in the open air at Sora, with the San Francisco Bay glimmering behind them and the sun bathing everything in golden warmth. Marla stood beside Elon, her curls dancing in a breeze, barefoot as always, her jeans dusted from another morning of walking the clay paths. Around them stood the people who had helped shape everything: Zion, Noor, Marco, Lena, Terrence, Emiliano, her mother, Curtis, and dozens of others who had arrived not as guests, but as contributors. Behind them, the buildings of Sora curved like open arms. She looked into the camera, swallowed gently, and spoke. "We were never meant to build this alone, and we didn't." Her voice was steady, clear. "We came together from all over the world, not because someone hired us or because we followed a brand. We came because something in each of us whispered, the way things are isn't the way they have to stay." She paused, letting that truth land. "What you see behind us isn't just architecture. It's memory, it's resistance, it's celebration. Every curve, every plant, every path has a name, a story, a reason." She turned to Elon for a moment. He gave a subtle nod. She turned back to the camera. "And now we're giving it away." That was the part that stunned everyone watching around the world. Marla lifted a small, leather-bound book from the table. This is the Sora Manual. But it's not a manual for buildings. It's a manual for belonging. It holds what we learned. Not just what to build, but how to build it, with people, not for them. The live stream cut to images of Haven in Detroit, the Heart House in Mexico City, the reimagined church in Pine Grove, the school in Jodhpur, the rooftop conversations in San Francisco, the mural painted by many hands. Elon finally spoke. We've open-sourced the entire Sora framework. Every drawing, every design, every failure, every breakthrough, free to any community that wants to try. This isn't about scaling our model. It's about awakening yours. It was one of the quietest revolutions in modern history. No headlines screamed, but the world began to listen. Within hours, requests poured in from around the globe, from indigenous collectives in Alaska to urban youth centers in Johannesburg. People weren't asking, can we copy it? They were asking, can we grow something like this where we are? And Marla's answer was always the same. Yes, as long as you lead with listening. Later that night, after the live stream ended and people gathered around bonfires and slow, happy music drifted across the plaza, Marla found herself sitting on the edge of the hill overlooking the bay. Her mother joined her, handing her a warm mug of tea. "You were brilliant," she said. Marla smiled softly. "I was real. That feels better." Her mother leaned her head on Marla's shoulder. "I still remember the first time you tried to build something. You were 5. You stacked pizza boxes into a castle." They both laughed. "I guess I've always been building places where people could be safe," Marla said. "You just finally found the tools." They sat there as the stars peeked through the thinning clouds. Behind them, laughter echoed. The smell of roasting corn drifted in the breeze. Someone was playing an acoustic version of an old folk song in Spanish. Marla turned to her mother. "I don't know where this goes next." Her mother took her hand. "You don't have to. You've already shown people that you can start without knowing the ending." And for the first time in her life, Marla didn't feel the pressure to plan, to draw, to produce. She simply let herself exist. Here, now, in the home she built, and that in turn built her. The morning after the live stream, the world was different, not because cities suddenly transformed, but because thousands of people believed they could. Marla woke early, as always, and slipped outside before the others had stirred. The clay beneath her bare feet was cool, familiar, grounding. She carried her sketchpad and a mug of tea to the highest point in Sora, where the view reached beyond the bay and into the promise of everything that could be. She sat in silence, letting the wind tug gently at her curls, watching as fog traced soft lines across the water like a brushstroke over canvas. In her lap was a letter she hadn't opened yet. It had arrived quietly, delivered by one of the young volunteers who said only, "It's from someone who saw your talk and wanted to say thank you." Inside, a single sheet of folded paper and a photo. The photo showed a small town. A boy holding up a sketch of a park. Behind him, a mural half-painted on a school wall with the words, "Inspired by Sora, built by us." The note was handwritten, unsteady but sincere. "We didn't wait. We started. My sister says we're going to make a new garden next. Thank you for showing us that we could." M. Marla pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Not long ago, she had been that kid. Just a girl soaked from the rain, delivering pizzas with a sketchpad tucked beside the boxes. She hadn't known where she was going. She just knew something inside her wanted to build, to connect, to help the world feel a little more like home. And now she was the signal, not the destination, the beginning. Later that week, as Sora welcomed visitors from other cities, students, builders, community leaders, single parents, artists, farmers, Marla stood at the welcome arch with Zion and Noor, handing out hand-bound copies of the Sora Manual. Each copy had space at the back for reflections, sketches, local adaptations. "This is just the start," Noor told a family from Brazil. "You don't need to copy us. You just need to trust your own rhythm." Each visitor left with a seed. Some literal, wildflower packets gathered from Sora's own rooftop gardens, and some metaphorical. Before one young girl departed with her father, She looked up at Marla and asked, "Can I draw my own version of Sora when I get home?" Marla knelt and smiled. That's exactly what it's for. On the final evening of that season, the people of Sora gathered for a night of quiet gratitude. There was no big event, just a long table under the stars, lit by paper lanterns. Dishes from every culture passed from hand to hand, music from handmade instruments, laughing children running barefoot. And at the center of it all, the original drawing Marla had made months before, now framed and resting on an easel under a canopy of trees. Elon raised his glass, not to himself, not to progress, not to the future, but to Marla, to the girl who reminded us that the smallest dream, drawn in the back of a delivery car, can become a map for the world. She didn't want to cry, but she did. And this time, she didn't apologize for it. She stood and responded with something simple, something honest. This place, it isn't perfect, but it's alive. And that's all I ever hoped for. That night, as the final lanterns flickered out and the sky stretched wide and velvet above her, Marla climbed into her tiny house, one of the first ever built on Sora soil, and lit a single candle. On the table sat her first sketchbook, worn, smudged, loved. She opened it to the first page. The original drawing of a shelter curved like an open arm, a place to rest and dream, was still there. She smiled, then flipped to a blank page, drew a spiral, and wrote beneath it, "Where to next?" Not a question of doubt, a question of invitation. And now, as this story comes to an end, we want to know, where are you watching from? And if you could design something for your own community, big or small, quiet or bold, what would it be? Leave a comment below, and let's keep this conversation growing. Because maybe your dream is the next one the world needs to see.